Hi, thank you so much for clicking on this link to learn a little bit more about nature connection. My name is Alexis Johnson. I am the Wild Wellbeing Lead for Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. I'm sure you're aware of who Staffordshire Wildlife Trust is, as you've likely clicked on our website or our Facebook pages or our YouTube site. But however, I just thought I'd better give you a little bit of context just in case. So Staffordshire Wildlife Trust is the largest conservation charity in Staffordshire. And we manage about 43 nature reserves at the moment, and we're specifically looking at linking those up and other important areas of conservation, so we can sort of create this living landscape, sort of a highway, if you like, a network for wildlife to use. We're also fortunate in that in Staffordshire, we've got one of the largest people engagement teams across the movement of wildlife trusts. And that means that not only are we looking after these wild spaces, but we're also able to connect the communities who live nearby to those natural spaces, the green spaces on their doorstep, and hopefully enable them to better appreciate what they've got locally to them and want to look after that again in the future. So I have worked for the Wildlife Trust for about 10 years, and my background is actually in environmental education. But I do live with, I'll just share a little bit about my lived experience of mental health issues. So I have lived with anxiety and depression for most of my life. And when I went away on maternity leave with my first child, I also experienced postnatal depression. And that hit me quite hard. I went through all of the usual routes through my GP and through my healthcare provider. So I tried medication and cognitive behavioral therapy. I went on some group therapy. I looked at online courses that were explaining what anxiety and depression was. And those all helped a little. But what I found helped me the most was being outdoors with my baby. So pushing her in her pushchair along the canal towpath, or perhaps taking her out to the front garden, and I could, play with daisies and feel the texture of the grass while she rolled around and sort of did the same. And those sorts of experiences helped me feel much better. And that got me to thinking about how I don't think this is just because I'm into nature. I think this is genuinely helping me. So as I started to look into it and return to work, the Wildlife Trust was also looking into it. Loads of research has started to pop up about the importance of nature connection for our health and well-being. And we together created this role, the Wild Wellbeing Lead. So that's a little bit of background about the trust and about my lived experience. I'll just tell you a little bit now about what we're going to do in the next couple of hours, or however long this takes you. You might just absolutely whiz through, which is fine. We're hoping to understand what nature connection is. We're going to be looking at the benefits and obstacles of connections to nature, exploring different approaches and practices, and also helping you to develop a nature connection practice. Now, that might be for you. It might be, I've said service users here, but really anyone that you're seeing on a regular basis, whether it's family or friends. Perhaps you're a shopkeeper and you see the same person every morning buying their newspaper. Maybe you work in a library and you see the same patrons on a weekly basis. It could be anything. You sort of get a feel for how people are doing. And once you start to build those relationships, people share more with you, and perhaps they've let you know that they're not feeling very well. It might be some gentle sort of nudging that you can do to direct them to nature, which is really a free tool for our health. So that's what we're hoping to get over. Now, because we are pre-recorded today, I can't hear who you are, unfortunately. But what I would like you to do is to just reflect for a moment on a couple of things. You can jot your thoughts down on paper if you want to, or just try to have a really clear visual in your mind's eye about these things. So the first one being your childhood. I want you to just take a minute to think back on your own childhood and consider what places you felt the happiest and most settled. They might be indoors, they might be outdoors, that's okay. So have a little think about that. And the second thing I'd like you to consider is what nature connection means to you. We'll define it in a moment, but all of us will have our own interpretations. So pause this for just a moment, and then I want you to think about those things, please. So, what we typically hear about is a lot of people reminiscing on their childhoods. Perhaps they're at the end of their grandparents' garden, maybe up an apple tree, or scrumping the neighbor's garden. We hear a lot of stories about people spending time in fields. Maybe they rocked up there on their bicycles. They were with their friends or their siblings. And we've got some really fond memories of time that we've spent outdoors. And we also likely felt quite happy and healthy in those places. in terms of what nature connection means to you, that's going to be really personal to you. As I said, we've all got our own interpretations, but I do have a video, I've got a quote here from Professor Miles Richardson. Miles Richardson works at the University of Derby. He's the founder of the Nature Connectedness Research Group. I highly recommend you look up either his blog, which is called Finding Nature, or you can just have a little Google and see what comes up when you type in the Nature Connectedness Research Group. They've done loads of incredible work. There's research papers, resources, videos, all sorts of things you can, if you find this as fascinating as I do, there's a lot more you can learn. So his quote here is, nature connectedness is a recognized psychological construct that describes an individual's sense of their relationship with the natural world. Our emotional attachment and beliefs about our inclusion within nature affect how we experience the world, our emotional response, our attitudes, and behavior towards nature. So it's not necessarily about the amount of time we spend in nature, but the quality of that time, the things that we're noticing. You don't need to be able to identify everything that flies past your window or every weed that's popping up in the cracks of the pavement, but you've noticed those things, and that is having a true connection to nature. You're also able to apply some meaning to those things, which we'll come to again in a moment. Now, I have got a video, but unfortunately, because this is pre-recorded, I'm not able to play it for you. But you can see here the name of the video and that it's available on YouTube. So please do take a moment to whiz over onto YouTube, perhaps open a second tab and have a little look for that video. It's just a couple minutes long, but Dr. Amir Khan, who is speaking with the RSPB in this case, can sort of better define what nature and well-being can do when they're working together. And I just want to take a moment as well. Obviously, the RSPB is a different organization to the Staff's Wildlife Trust, to the Wildlife Trust movement, but it's another conservation charity. And when I first started working for the Wildlife Trust, there was a little bit of competition between us and other local conservation charities. You know, we're in competition for funding and for members to join in. We're in competition for land purchases. But really, in the last 5 years or so, I've noticed that's just been pushed to one side. I'm really happy to report because we're starting to realize, really, we're all after the same end goal. We've all got a common purpose and a common cause. And we're starting to work together a lot better, which is exactly what our environment needs from us at the moment. So I don't have any qualms at all with sharing the RSPB's video, and I encourage you to do take a watch of that if you've got a moment. So, do we need a connection to nature? So, there is a report on nature loss. This is produced by the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I've got that written down. There's no way I could remember that. And Miles Richardson has summed up what that report stated, and also he's reflected on that. So I wanted to share his reflections with you. So what he summed up in this paper was that nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history. 1 million species are threatened with extinction, with grave impacts on people around the world now likely. 3/4 of the land-based environment and about 66% of the marine environment has been significantly altered by human actions. And plastic pollution has increased tenfold since 1980, less than 50 years ago. And human actions threaten more species with global extinction now than ever before. So, do we need a connection to nature? I hope you agree that the answer is yes. His response to that paper then, which is also available on the blog, as I mentioned before, it can absolutely help. Nature connection can help, and this is how. It helps to describe our current relationship with nature and the social context. It's something that we can measure, and we've developed new interventions to improve it. He goes on to say as well that we know that nature connection is associated with a good life. It's associated with values and actions that link through to consumption and waste. It can help us examine the value-action gap, and that's being, how much we value something, and in turn, how much inclination we have to take action or want to save or preserve or maintain that. It's inclusive and it's accessible across the population, and it can inform innovative new approaches to urban infrastructure. So, for example, in newly built neighborhoods should include some sustainable drainage schemes, perhaps consider making paths and driveways capable of absorbing runoff. There's houses, that have house martin boxes built in or bat nesting boxes. Those are all some considerations that how a nature connection can be applied. So I mentioned before that it can be measured. So Professor Miles Richardson's developed with his research group this nature connection index. That's just, it's like a score from 1 to 7. There's a few questions like I always find beauty in nature, and you mark that from 1 to 7. And other questions like that. And what they found when they first put this this questionnaire out and interviewed several people is that we found a sharp dip in connection with nature into the teenage years. And then there was a slow recovery to the adult population average or mean around 30 years old. This isn't to say that, teenagers aren't, that, those kids, it's really easy to paint this picture of teenagers not wanting to do anything but focus on themselves. And that's really unfair because they've got loads of priorities and pressures, as well as their brain development. And all of that's influencing how connected we are to nature at any given moment. We've been developing our work with youth and young people at the Wildlife Trust, and they've got so much on their plates, right? They're doing their GCSEs or their A-levels. They're looking at starting their new career. Perhaps they've just passed their driving license test and they've got to look at investing in a car. There's so much else going on, as well as keeping up with peers, starting families, creating relationships. And then they've got this brain development going on at the same time. So let me show you what that looks like in a bit of a graphic form. So you can see, let me see if I can, here we go. Here's the dip here when they're about 12, 13. And then you can see that it does gradually increase when we get to 30 and 40. And if you think about your own life, it may well resemble something similar. So you were also focusing on those other priorities at that point in your life. Whereas now perhaps if you're of the similar age to me, you're looking back at how you're looking into, I'd really like to go for a walk today. I'd like to spend some more time outside. Perhaps you're visiting National Trust properties or English heritage properties or nature reserves. You're going birding more. You're spending more time in your garden. Our priorities sort of change. And that's what his research found, Miles Richardson, as well. So not only is that really interesting, but the Greater Good Science Center at the University of California, Berkeley has also done a bit of research. Not only does it change within our one lifetime, but we have seen a greater disconnect from generation to generation as well. So in this piece of research, they were tracking the amount of nature-related words in popular culture, like songs and films and books. And you can see that had a bit of a peak around the mid-70s, and then it continued to decline around the turn of the century. You do see a bit of an increase there towards the end. And if I remember correctly, I think that was probably more linked to more conversations and discussions around greenhouse gases, climate change, and the detrimental impact that humans have had on the natural world. Now, if you overlay that with individualistic vocabulary, so words like I and me and myself, that's individualistic vocabulary is that sharp red increased line there you can see. So you can see there's a decline in the use of words that have something to do with nature, but then a sharp increase in the amount of words. We do see selfie culture and personal blogs, but this is also represented in books and music and films. We've been looking a lot more inwardly and less to our surroundings, and that has been recorded in popular culture as well. So, why are we less connected now than before? I do want you to take a moment here, if you've got time, to consider why that might be. And I came up with a few things after just a couple of minutes, but I'm sure you've got a longer list. So, for example, I've mentioned refrigeration. At the Wolseley Centre, at our headquarters, we have an ice house where the people who used to live in the posh Wolseley Centre would keep their foods that needed to be preserved, so meats and things, and servants would have to walk over to the ice house before bringing that back to the main house. They would be experiencing nature every time they exited the main house, entered the ice house, and returned. And also, before we had refrigeration, we would have to go to shops much more frequently. So we'd have to leave our houses, go to these shops to buy our groceries. Television, obviously, has had a huge impact on how much time we spend indoors versus out. The way that we farm and the way that we do agriculture is vastly different. Even if you think about just that tractor itself, historically, tractors would have been open. And farmers would be open to all elements. And now they're enclosed. They've got radios, they've got air conditioning. So farmers themselves are experiencing nature very differently to the rest of it, to the way that they would have been. Many of you may have recollections of using the outhouse. So using the outdoor loo in either your parents' house, your grandparents' house, maybe your childhood house. And that's vastly changed. That's very different to what it used to be, even just 50 or 60 years ago, as well as the way we shop. So many of us, myself included, do online shopping now. I don't even leave the house to go to the shops. I get my groceries delivered to my back door, where I'm promptly just put it straight into the fridge. Now, highlighting these things doesn't mean that any of them are not worthwhile. Of course they are. Technology has helped us in so many ways, but we do need to sort of acknowledge that there's been a drastic change. And we're less likely to notice weather patterns, sunrises, sunsets, phenology, or the way the seasons, what changes with the seasons, because we've developed this comfortable indoor set of habits over the last century or so. Now, we're going to take a little pause. And what I'd like you to be able to do now is to try a sit spot. So a sit spot is where you just find a place in nature where you can sit or rest every single day, ideally, whether that's in your garden, in a park, or a wild place, or somewhere with a view to the outside. And hopefully you'll be able to choose somewhere where you can be comfortable and undisturbed. You're only going to try this once for today, but I have put a time target if you wanted to sort of integrate that into your daily life. For a longer term practice would be about 10 minutes every day. So ideally, it's somewhere really accessible to you, that you'll be able to visit, perhaps someplace you walk past on a daily basis. And I want you to pause this recording and then take 10 minutes or so. You can have a comfort break, give yourself a cup of tea, and give yourself permission to try this sit spot exercise. A sit spot is not doing anything, right? So I'm giving you permission to sit outside for 10 minutes and not do anything. So go ahead and pause this, come back to me, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the sit spots. So hopefully you've been able to go outside and you've come back in. So what's brilliant about a sit spot is that typically when we're going from A to B, we're rushing, and you will hear birds do alarm calls saying, oh, potential danger, that this might be a predator, everybody take cover. So you do hear birds, but they're usually alarm calling one another and hiding in hedges or trees, or a good hiding spot nearby. You also might be lucky enough to notice some insects or something buzzing around you, but you're not taking much notice of them. You've got a destination. So with a sit spot, you are adjusting to your surroundings. So you're going to be able to notice and be mindful of your surroundings better. You are going to be noticing those changes over the seasons and phenology, especially if you're able to do this on a regular basis, like daily or weekly practice. But also the nature that is existing in that space is going to acclimatize to your being there. So at first, the birds might do some alarm calls, but after 10 minutes or after a week of visiting the same space, the birds will start singing. They'll go, oh yeah, that's not a predator. We've seen that person here every day for the last week. We can return to our normal behaviors. So you'll be able to see nature in a much different light. And it's a really nice practice, not only for you to stop and take a minute and move away from screens or work, or whatever you're working on at the moment, but also to be able to take in the nature that's on your doorstep and allow nature to adjust to your being there. So it's a really nice exercise, and I highly recommend you get that squeezed into your daily routine. So we were talking about how we've changed over the last century and how we're less connected to nature than we were before. So references to nature declined after, but not before, the 1950s. So typically this trend of urbanization, which swallows up urban areas and swallows up natural areas, and cuts off people from their natural surroundings. That's typically used to explain the weakening human connection to nature, but it's debated among researchers because urbanization rates haven't changed from the first half of the 20th century to the second, at least not in the US and UK. So that change from the 1950s would suggest it's not related to urbanization. I'm sure you've guessed, really, the primary cause of our connection weakening is due to technological change, particularly the rapid increase of indoor and virtual recreation options. So in the 50s, we saw this rapid rise of TV as the most popular medium of entertainment. Video games first appeared in the 70s, and they've since become a popular pastime. And the internet's been claiming more and more leisure time since the late 90s. I should also mention at this point that there is an online course. It's free. It's written by the Nature Connectedness Research Group, and it delves into this far more deeply. And a lot of these points I've taken from that course, and I highly recommend you get on there if you've got the time and if this is something you're passionate about. So how do we move from, tapping away on our screens and being totally inward to whatever this wonderful woman is doing, totally embracing nature and the wind as it blows through her hair? I would like you, if you've, again, got a moment, to open up another tab and find this video in YouTube. It's the 5 Pathways to Nature Connection, which is produced by the University of Derby and the Nature Connectedness Research Group once again. So it's explaining those 5 pathways to nature connection. So do please take a moment to have a watch of that. If you don't have time, or if you've come back to me now, this is what those 5 pathways to a nature connection look like. The first pathway is contact. So we're engaging with nature through the senses, hearing the wind and the leaves, smelling a flower, feeling the bark on a tree. We can do a lot of those things in a sit spot or on our everyday walks to work or to bus stops. The next pathway is beauty, noticing the beauty in nature, watching the sunset or admiring the detail of a flower. Emotion, we feel before we think, creating an emotional bond with nature. How does being in nature make you feel? Next is meaning, natural symbolism and signs of nature, the annual deer rut, the first swallow of summer, and your favorite place in nature. And finally, compassion, developing a moral and ethical concern for nature. So it might have an impact on your product choices, where you stand on animal welfare, and what you can do for nature. So once again, you'll notice this, I've popped the National Trust's logo on here because they were working with a Nature Connection research group and developed some resources, including one that included this graphic. So for me, I feel this is I'm going to show you a couple different tools that we use to start to integrate nature connection or improve our well-being through nature. I think this one, I don't know, it sort of feels like perhaps it's the less tangible of the two, but it might be more meaningful or beneficial. Let me show you the next one. So there is another video that you can watch. This is about the 5 ways to well-being. So again, we've got Dr. Amir Khan here, who is this time doing a video with the Wildlife Trusts. And this method, if you like, is one that the Wildlife Trusts are invested in, the 5 ways to well-being, or the 5 ways to a wild well-being, because we like to make everything wild at the Wildlife Trust. The NHS is also on board with this one, and often we see it recommended through their services as well. It touches on many of the same elements. So again, open another tab, search for this video, and do give it a watch. All of these videos are just 1 or 2 minutes long, so definitely worth a watch if you're a visual learner as well. This is what those 5 ways to well-being look like. Again, here we've got a graphic that was produced by the conservation volunteers. So we're connecting with the people around you. You're being active, discovering an activity that you enjoy, taking notice, being aware of the world around you, continually learning, trying something new or to rediscover an old interest. We're giving, so that could be doing something good for the community. That could be sharing as well, sharing something you've written or some artwork you've produced. And both of these approaches are looking at human nature and our evolution, right? Both the pathways to nature connection and also the 5 ways to well-being. We are social, gregarious beings. And that means that loneliness is, we really need to make sure that we don't find ourselves in the lonely position. Going back to the Stone Age, if you were separated from your group or tribe, you were stuffed. And a great way to implement either the 5 ways to well-being, as we see here, or the pathways to nature connection, which I showed you previously, is through nature journals, something I get really excited about, so bear with me. So I want to give you a little bit of background here. I first started practicing nature journaling when I worked in Iowa, which is the state I hail from. I'm sure you noticed I don't have a local accent. Iowa was historically tallgrass prairie. We now have less than 1/10% of our native tallgrass prairie in Iowa, but I was fortunate enough to work on a reconstructed prairie right in the central part of the state. And I was also really fortunate enough to work with someone named Michelle Garcia. Not a particularly famous person, but she is somebody who's really truly impacted my life because she not only was just a really lovely person, but she introduced me to nature journaling. And this is how Michelle would introduce us when we were working with school groups. Now, in Iowa, right, and in America, our history is obviously very different to the history here in the UK, but we are all familiar through our childhood education of Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark were commissioned by Thomas Jefferson, and they were to explore this newly acquired Louisiana purchase. So this big chunk of land that we'd purchased from the French, checking out all of the land that was west of the Mississippi. And then south of what today would be Chamberlain, South Dakota, Lewis and Clark have made an observation. So they've made dozens of nature journals, of books that recorded what they found when they were traveling, when they were on their expedition, similar to what Charles Darwin was doing in the UK, right? So when they were in South Dakota in 1806, right, to give you some context as well in terms of when we're talking, one of them, I didn't record who made this actual recording, I apologize, but he's written the following. I ascended to the high country, and from an eminence I had a view of the plains from a great distance. From this eminence I had a view of a greater number of buffalo than I had ever seen before at one time. I must have seen near 20,000 of those animals feeding on this plain. 20,000. So when we would work with children who were coming to us for school visits at this wildlife refuge, we would have them look out over out the window. So imagine they could see the hills were brown with bison. It's estimated that at the time when they were there, about around 1800s, there was about 20 to 30 million bison that inhabited North America before Western settlement. But by the late 1800s, so less than a century later, there's only a few hundred bison left in the United States. The animal's habitat was reduced, they were hunted to near extinction, and had it not been for a few private individuals who were working with tribes in the Department of the Interior, the bison would be completely extinct today. This bit always gives me goosebumps. I find that really shocking, the impact that humans have had on nature. So how is this relevant to nature journaling? It just really clearly demonstrates how important it is to record our observations in something like a nature journal and some notes. Because what if the wildlife you noticed today suddenly disappeared tomorrow? Maybe a disease wiped out every squirrel in the UK. So if today you've noticed a squirrel and you've jotted that down somewhere, you may well have the last recording of probably a grey squirrel ever seen in Staffordshire, or ever seen in the UK, or ever seen in your specific town. That's really heavy stuff. Also, it gives us an indication, if lots of people have done those little nature journal entries, of how far spread they were. This is the importance of citizen science, right? Nature journals are another way that we can get citizen science, have some impact personally in what scientists are researching. It's really important to science and to the scientific community, because they can't be everywhere at once. So Lewis and Clark's records of bison have enabled us to compare that to today's population. We know how drastic it is because they wrote how many they'd seen. Previously, that hadn't been written down. It was perhaps shared orally, but we didn't know to what extent we had really wiped out that population. So I want you to have a think about what wildlife you've noticed today. And then what I'd like you to do is to grab a notebook and a scrap of paper and a pen, find a place in nature. Perhaps you can return to your sit spot and rest comfortably. I want you can set up your nature journal however you like, and you can just get writing and doodling. If you wanted to do this on a regular basis, again, I tried to give you some options if you want to start practicing these things and integrating them into your own routines. I would say this would be a really good one to do maybe for half an hour on a weekly basis. Of course, it's entirely up to you. The way that I would set this up, the way that I set up all of my nature journal entries is like this. I always include the date and the time, including whether it's AM or PM, because I'm sure you can imagine if you saw a badger at midday in Rugeley in Staffordshire, that would have different significance if we saw that in the middle of the night. Some weather words, but because those are subjective, you can also include the temperature, remembering again your labels, degrees C or degree F, depending on where you are, and your location. So for example, it might look like this. I've got the date on there, a time, some weather words for today, and a picture if you are into drawing, and temperature with its label, and my location. And for this exercise, if you want a little bit more structure, I highly recommend setting up this T chart here. Now, for this prompt, I've taken inspiration from the writing of Rachel Carson, and this is The Sense of Wonder. So you might recognize the name Rachel Carson because she wrote Silent Spring. She's a really important conservationist in the United States, but really globally as well. She did a lot of research on DDT and the impact that had on eggs, on egg shells, and whether or not different species of bird would succeed because of the impact of DDT. This article was actually initially written in a magazine, but it's since been published into a book. So if you'll bear with me, you can fast forward this bit if you don't want to listen to me read a couple excerpts. I'm just going to take out some inspiration from Rachel Carson's writing. I sincerely believe that for the child and for the parent seeking to guide him, it is not half so important to know as to feel. If facts are the seeds that later produce knowledge and wisdom, then the emotions and the impressions of the senses are the fertile soil in which the seeds must grow. The years of early childhood are the time to prepare the soil. Once the emotions have been aroused, a sense of the beautiful, the excitement of the new and the unknown, a feeling of sympathy, pity, admiration, or love, then we wish for knowledge about the object of our emotional response. Once found, it has a lasting meaning. It is more important to pave the way for the child to want to know than to put him on a diet of facts he's not ready to assimilate. If you're familiar with David Attenborough, he's got a very similar quote about introducing people to nature. If they don't know it, they're not going to care for it. She goes on to write a little later, for most of us, knowledge of our world comes largely through sight, yet we look about with such unseeing eyes that we're partially blind. One way to open your eyes to unnoticed beauty is to ask yourself, what if I'd never seen this before? What if I knew I would never see it again? So, inspired by Rachel Carson in her book, Sense of Wonder, we're going to be focusing on wonder for this activity when you go outdoors. If you write a T-bar chart, on the left-hand side, or whichever side, you can write all of the things that you experience when you're outdoors that give you wonder, as in awe, that's awesome. And on the other side, you can write wonder, as in, I wonder. So perhaps you wonder how birds fly, or perhaps you're in awe of how birds fly. It's okay if it's in both. There's no silly thing that you can write here. No one is going to see it apart from you. I have a degree in ecology, and I still wonder about lots of things, like birds flying. I definitely learned that when I was at university, but I've since forgotten. So I have both wonder, awe, and wonder with that. So pause this recording. Take 10 minutes or so once again for a comfort break. Get yourself a cup of tea, and then give yourself permission. It's okay to go outside and try nature journaling. You're doing it as part of this course, okay? Go and do that, and then come back in, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. Okay. I really hope that you're feeling refreshed and you've noticed more than you typically do when you're going outside to get in your car or you're going outside to head to the bus stop. I hope that you've been able to have a whole list of things you wonder about, as well as wonder It's very common for us to choose a category. One category tends to be a little heavier than the others. That's okay. They don't have to be super even Stevens. What you can also do is I like to do a KWL chart. So something I know for K, something I wonder for W, and something I've learned when I go outside. So perhaps you've learned that there's loads of different shades of green, for example, and you wonder why there's a bunch of different shades of green. And something you know is that green comes from chlorophyll. Right. I don't know. You can come up with your own examples. It's just, again, an opportunity for you to, make a recording about the nature you're noticing out your window. There's a couple different camps here as well about nature journaling. So there's people who think that a nature journal should be purely scientific and it should only contain observations. But there's another camp who sort of feel that a journal could be like a diary, and it could be a place for you to record the meaningful actions you've taken, the meaning that you feel. Perhaps a robin has landed. I've had some really lovely stories. A robin's landed next to you, and maybe it was an uncle who's passed away. That was his favorite bird, and it felt like he's come to visit you. Those are the sorts of things that, when we're applying meaning to nature. For me, I sit somewhere in the middle. I like to record everything I see or every bird that I hear if I happen to know its name. But I also really like to take a minute then to either doodle and draw a picture, or to, I don't know, just a bit of creative writing. And it feels good for me. We're all very different. So whatever suits you is absolutely fine. But I do encourage you to try that on sort of a weekly basis if you can. Okay. Now, part of the reason I was keen to sort of come along, I was keen to record this and share nature connection with you is because of the Wildlife Trust is working on this Team Wilder movement. So this is a good opportunity for me to try to explain a little bit more about what that is. It's a great opportunity for you to bring your community along for this journey, to connect as many people to nature as we can. We're facing a crisis for our natural world, and we want both wildlife and people to be able to benefit from a healthy environment. Staff's Wildlife Trust is restoring broken ecosystems and returning missing species. We are putting nature's recovery at the heart of everything we do, but we absolutely can't do it alone. So from today, you are the 1 in 4. So this is based on one of the oldest social science theories, the law of diffusion of innovation. And that explains how innovators and early product users build interest and excitement around new products. And then you reach a tipping point, which again is another book by Malcolm Gladwell. You reach a tipping point where it becomes a commonplace occurrence. So we're saying we need more people on nature's side, and then we can achieve so much more if we come together. If just 1 in 4 people across Staffordshire took action, that would be enough to change the hearts and the minds of the majority, and then create the momentum we need. If you would like to learn a little bit more about the tipping point and starting a movement, I've got another video for you to watch. Again, open another tab, have a little Google of the TED Talk on how to start a movement. This one's really quick. It's a bit of a giggle, and it just, for me, helps things to really click together. Take a moment, please, and do watch that. We are creating infrastructure and support systems at the Wildlife Trust to sort of ensure that the first followers of this movement become our salespeople. You know, we want everyone to pitch this cause. We want everyone to be talking about how important nature is and making really worthwhile, meaningful actions that help nature and wildlife. Okay, together we can tip the scales back in nature's favor. We've all got different skills and knowledge and experience to offer, and no one knows your local area better than you do. And it is your time and your voice and action that will make the difference. Use a passionate group of individuals in your communities and their skills and knowledge and experiences. Get to know your neighbors. Get to know the people who are running workshops in your area, who work in community groups, who run the corner shop, who work in the libraries. and find out what their strengths are and share yours. And then together we can absolutely tip the scales back in nature's favor. Now, it's important to actually put some of this into practice, right? I want you to have a think about how you can bring nature into your home or into your setting at work, whether you've got an office or a consultation room or just your desk where you work from home. You might be able to have a nature table or a space, which could be as simple as, a pine cone, an interesting rock, or some lichen on a stick. What you found during your sit spot or when you were nature journaling, you can bring those things in. Bring some fresh flowers in. They cheer you up. They cheer up the people that you see around you. And you can also use, if it's possible, and if you don't have a super sensitive nose, some essential oils and a diffuser. That's fairly low expense with pretty big impact. If you can't actually get outside on a regular basis, you can bring some of the outdoors in through some essential oils. You might be able to take walking meetings. You can have lunch breaks outdoors. You can freshen up an existing outdoor space to be wildlife friendly. Maybe throw in some seating. There's lots of different things you can do to not only improve your connection to nature, but those that you work with. So do please have a think about what you can do and share. Do talk to your colleagues or your family and friends about how you can improve your own spaces for nature and also for yourselves. I've got a bit of an example here. When I first developed this course, it was for Staffordshire libraries. And I shared this list with a library who happened to have nearly all of it in place already. Our libraries are incredible. But for example, in a library, not only are they, they're not just books, are they? They're the hub of our community. They've got technology that we can access. They've got lots of different things that we can check out, audiobooks and videos in some cases. There's things that you can download, things that you can view online, physical books they have loads. They also have lots of engagement with the public, different learning that you can take part in your library. Many of them offer book trails and public parks near to you. Many of them will have book clubs. So we've talked about perhaps integrating some nature-based book clubs. If they are lucky enough to have an outdoor space, they could have raised beds or a mindfulness and reading garden. I do know there's libraries in Staffordshire with outdoor spaces who are working right now on developing those so the public can come and use that. Some of them have seed libraries or seed swaps, so you can take seeds and plant them in your own gardens or in your plots. Also, we talked about bringing nature indoors. So I mentioned already about fresh flowers and essential oils. And some libraries are doing those things as well. And perhaps as well having outdoor explorer bags to check out. So just sort of everything you do in your work or in your home life, can it be done outside or with something to do with nature? It will absolutely improve your health. There's loads of research that backs this up. It's not woo-woo. It's scientific, and it should become part of our lives. I know I'm biased, but take my word for this. That's pretty much wrapping this workshop up. We do have an additional workshop that we're going to be recording on green social prescribing. If you're not sure what social prescribing is, or green social prescribing, you are more than welcome to learn more and view our other recording online. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me bang on about nature connection. I hope you can feel my passion from wherever you're based and that you're inspired to improve your nature connection to the connection of the people around you. If you do want to get in touch with anyone at the Wildlife Trust, particularly our people engagement team, you can use this email address and we would be happy to hear from you and get back to you when we can. For now, that's it, and thank you very much. Bye.